Hello and welcome to the Slate breakdown for Week 8. I'm Big Italy 42 here with Denny Carter at CD Carter 13, and we had our little discussion here before the show talking about Tom Brady and his greatness, and Julian Edelman, his garbage time, and Rob Gronkowski, and I mean it's incredible how efficient this team is. And then Deion Lewis, the guy that nobody wanted, one of now the 50,000th player that nobody wanted. The Patriots have turned into a stud. It's just remarkable.
Yeah, I mentioned in this week's column that Brady is, along with Andy Dalton, weirdly, is maybe like the last cash game quarterback that you can bank on, even more so than Aaron Rodgers. If you look at Rodgers' production since he went berserk against Kansas City's terrible secondary on Monday night a few weeks ago, I mean, Brady, coming into last night, was just rock solid as far as a floor goes, and last night he was a great tournament option as well. So he's going forward. If I'm going to pay up for a quarterback, it's going to be him and not Rodgers, and definitely not Luck. Just going forward, I just think that the weapons he has, the game plan they have, and the number of offensive snaps that they have per game. Makes him so safe week in and week out.
Yeah, and the fact that, his number one running back, if you watched that game last night, I don't know how many catches Deion Lewis had. I think it was 9 or 10. I mean, had him lined up out wide. They did a little bit of everything with him. And, I mean, if you're utilizing your running back almost primarily in the passing game, then, you're just getting even higher floor and higher ceiling with Brady there as well. So
sure.
It's incredible. I'm kind of sad that I didn't get them on the Sunday slate, but, oh well. We'll get them next week. Chiefs and the Lions starting off. If you've got the London game on your slate, personally, I'm getting kind of tired of these London games at 9:30 in the morning. But last week's game was entertaining. I won't say it was a good game. It was actually a terrible game for both ends. But this one should be competitive. Two teams that have kind of not led up to expectations. I guess 45-point total. Chiefs at 25 here, and we saw Charkandrick West, the guy that everyone thought would have a big game a couple weeks ago, finally break out and have a nice receiving game. We've seen Matt Stafford play better the last couple weeks. So what's your take with this one? If you're playing a slate that has this, or do you have anybody from the Thursday games through this?
I do. I have a lot of West, Charkandrick West this week. The matchup that he came into the first week where he was named starter, it was against Minnesota on the road. It was just kind of an ugly outlook from the start. Last week, and I mentioned in the article, he saw a ton of touches. He saw 24 touches last week. He's seeing basically 3/4 of the Chiefs' carries. So he has that backfield locked down. He looked pretty good. He scored 21 PPR points last week with such a high total for the Chiefs, 25 points, which just seems high. I mean, for an Alex Smith-led offense without Jamal Charles. But I think that West will have a lot to do with the scoring in this one. When you adjust for strength of schedule, Detroit's defense is allowing the 9th most fantasy points to running backs. So I think that this is a game where I feel confident in playing West in cash games, and he's a great budget relief, cap relief, especially on DraftKings.
Yeah, and a nice swerve, because this is, I think, going to be another one of those weeks where some guys we'll get to here in a few minutes going to be really popular, especially in cash games, especially running backs. So you can swerve off these guys in GPPs, probably going to get much lower ownership than you would most weeks. On the Lions side, you mentioned here Calvin Johnson. You like Golden Tate as well. What's your take on Eric Ebron in this one? Because he did have a big game last week. There's been some buzz about him a little bit, at least for those that are playing this slate here.
Yeah, I mean, just generally, I think that there's some reason to have some hope for Detroit's offense. They fired their offensive coordinator. They brought in Jim Bob Cooter, greatest name in the game, to run that offense. And there's been a lot of talk among beat writers, among the offensive. I can't even bring myself to say it.
It sounds like a name from South Park, doesn't it? Like he's the uncle or something.
I know. Among players that the offense is going to open up, and thank goodness, because I think that they have great weapons. I mean, Golden Tate on a lot of teams is a number one receiver. Calvin is fantastic when he gets opportunity. Ebron has just been dominant when he gets coverage against smaller safeties or slower linebackers. So I tend to think that they have some real value here because they're all of their DFS prices are suppressed after so little fantasy production, really, over most of the first 7 weeks here. I mentioned the Tate Stafford stack. I talked about the reasons I like that. There's another reason I didn't mention because it's a little bit narrative streety, but Tate has been complaining quite a bit this week about not getting the ball. So there's a little bit of a squeaky wheel element there. I do think that has some validity to it. You'll hear a guy say, "I'm not getting the ball. I'm not running the right routes. I'm not doing this and that," and suddenly he starts getting the ball a little bit. So Tate is so cheap. I'm not playing him cash. I like him in tournaments a lot.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Tom. This next one's going to be an interesting one for a lot of reasons. We got the Falcons and the Buccaneers, 48.5-point total, decent total. Really, the one negative about some Atlanta guys is they are a big favorite, but Devonta Freeman here, a guy who everyone was mad at last week for getting 130 yards because he didn't get 2 to 3 touchdowns. He was still great. I mean, he was exactly what you paid for. Your high floor didn't give you the high ceiling, but Julio Jones here in this matchup as well, another guy that people are looking at. So, I mean, this one could be one of those games we see turn into a shootout because neither defense is great. I've seen some talk about playing the Falcons defense against Tampa Bay. I mean, they're turnover prone, so I could definitely see that. But what's your take on this one?
Yeah, I do think that you can, if you're looking to save money on the defensive side of things. I think that Atlanta makes for probably the best punt play of the week. Just looking at lower cost, like the lowest cost defensive options, I really honestly can't bring myself to use any of them.
No, I was looking too. It's ugly.
Yeah, because they just don't, like, none of them have a floor. Like their floor is like 0 or -3. I mean, it's bad. I mean, Atlanta's defense probably has some use there. Matt Ryan, I see thrown around a little bit this week as a solid play. I just hesitate because I know he has Julio. I know if Julio has a big game, Ryan might have a big game, but this offense is predicated on Devonta Freeman as it was last week again. I mean, Freeman again was that centerpiece, and I think that really puts a damper on Ryan's prospects. So I don't have any Ryan shares this week. Besides that, I have the kind of a regular amount of Julio exposure, and I do think that he comes with some ceiling here because it's such a high. It's 28.25 points, for the Falcons projected in Vegas. So I really like him this week.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. Then on the other side, we got Doug Martin, Mike Evans, both guys. Evans, like you mentioned here, seen a ton of volume. Doug Martin, I mean, if we're talking about guys that are getting a full workload, he's finally getting integrated into the passing game here a little bit, which really wasn't the case the last few years, even in the first couple weeks this year. But, I mean, he's been one of the more consistent, better plays in all of football recently. And really the only hesitation I've kind of had with him in cash games is the fact that if this one does, kind of get away from Tampa Bay here a little bit, then maybe he isn't involved. But like we said, he's seen some looks in the passing game. So what's your take on Doug Martin as far as cash games go?
That I'm with you there on the hesitation because in the games in which Tampa has been blown out, and this, I'm not saying this shapes up as one for sure, but I mean it's an 8.5-point spread. It's or almost 8-point spread. So it kind of looks like a game that Charles Sims might get a little more action than usual. The good news is that no team has no team has given up more rushing touchdowns than Atlanta through 7 games. So they've given up 10 touchdowns on the ground. And you have to imagine if the Bucs are going to score on the ground, Martin's going to be involved. So I really struggle with Martin, and I'm hedging on him big time in cash formats because of that potential for an uneven game script.
Yeah, it just seems to me like you said, it's a little bit of hesitation, but around his price range, he just stands out as so much better of a play. But yeah, I mean, it looks like we're on the same page there. So gonna have to make some tough decisions this week. But one tough decision I won't be making is not getting a lot of exposure to the Ravens Chargers. 50-point total. Ravens with a big total, Chargers with a decent sized total in this one, and I even think that 50 points is too low in this one because both these secondaries have just been horrible. I mean, San Diego, if you ask me, worst defense in all of football. So I'm loading up on Steve Smith again, Phillip Rivers in cash. I mean, Danny Woodhead, especially on DraftKings, a little bit of everything here for me.
Yeah, I mean, how good, Woodhead is getting so many snaps per game with the Chargers, not trying to run really and failing to run when they actually try. So I think you'll see that again. I know the Ravens were roasted by the Cardinals on the ground last week. I think that's in part due to the Ravens really playing the pass. I mean, they rarely had many people in the box, and that's Chris Johnson took advantage. And also there was that play where Johnson popped up off the pile that sort of skews those rushing stats. So the Ravens are actually pretty good against the run. I don't think that the Chargers will be able to do anything but throw. So Rivers, it's Rivers all day in cash games again. He's on pace to break the single season passing yard total right now. So it's something to watch. And Woodhead is I think on DraftKings, it's kind of a must play at his price. So low, right?
Oh yeah, I mean it's $4,500. It's insanity. I mean I saw someone had a tweet that said he's only had one game where he didn't hit double digits, but his price has decreased even because I mean he was 4,700 at times this year as well. So I mean I'm with you there. He's got a nice high floor. PPR, you got to imagine 5-6, maybe even more catches. You get 40 yards off that. There's your 10 points at 4,500. Really low risk, and he gets red zone looks too, so that's always nice.
Yeah, I mean, they're obsessed with Woodhead in the red zone. It's very strange, but it works.
Yeah, I mean, I guess once the Patriots get rid of somebody, at least had value at some point. So you just go ahead and just throw him in there. And then on the other side, this game, obviously the Baltimore side, I love Steve Smith at least as a DFS play, maybe not as a player, but either way, seeing some talk about Forsett here. I know you mentioned him here as well. I mean, this San Diego defense just really hasn't stopped anyone, front seven, secondary at all. So, I mean, Forsett is one of those guys. There's not a whole lot of guys around his price range either that you feel good about, but you got to imagine that he has himself a nice game this week too.
Yeah, I mean, San Diego's allowing 5.8 yards per carry in road contests this year. It's the old, West Coast team traveling east for a 1:00 start. I think that Forsett could have a lot to do with the Ravens having success here, through the air and on the ground. Forsett is a good passing game option too. So, his price is pretty low on both FanDuel and DraftKings. I think it's a little less appealing on FanDuel, but I'm plugging him in a lot of places as a guy who I think could do a lot, even if he gets only 12 or 14 carries. I think that he could still exceed his value by quite a bit. As long as he gets maybe 15 touches total, I think that he could do a lot against this Chargers defense that, like you said, probably is the worst in the league right now.
Yeah, I'm on board with you there. Next one, not too exciting, 42-point total. Bears and Vikings here, pretty much a pick 'em. We're looking at one guy here you mentioned, Alshon Jeffrey in particular. He's a good guy to target here in this one. Stephon Diggs has, you said here he's been a revelation. He really has. I mean, he's emerged as the number one guy there, and they kind of thought Mike Wallace would be that guy, then he wasn't. But Diggs has been great. I mean, that catch last week had to be catch of the week. I mean, it looked like he was just overthrown by a mile, closed on it in an instant, made a great catch. So, I mean, I like both these guys, but outside of that, personally, I don't have much. But what else are you looking at here?
Yeah, I mean, Diggs is, like I said in this article, in the breakdown, he is a number one receiver on his team, available for the cost of a number three receiver, and to me that's just hard to pass up. Chicago's secondary is not all that scary, and it's pretty clear that the passing game, whatever little passing production the Vikings create every week, he's going to have a lot to do with it. So. It's looking at Pro Football Focus's look at wide receiver cornerback matchups. Diggs has the 8th best in the whole league this week, in as far as coverage against him. Alshon, speaking of Alshon, has the top what PFF rates as the top wide receiver cornerback matchup. He's going against Xavier Rhodes, who has been burned pretty badly here, including against Calvin Johnson last week. Um, Jeffrey is wide receiver 18 as far as price goes on DraftKings, and I really think he has pretty clear top 10 upside in this one. So I'm getting him into a lot of GPPs, especially.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And you mentioned here you're not intent on shoehorning Peterson into lineups. Obviously, talking about Adrian Peterson there, and I'm with you. I mean, he's just the offense isn't great. I'd rather have pieces of Stephon Diggs against that secondary personally. And like you mentioned there as well, there's other viable options, same price, less. One in particular here that's kind of contingent on a quarterback that we'll get to here in a couple minutes. But I'm with you. GPP play, but not a guy that I'm looking for in cash games.
Yeah, I think that offense is so limited that when it's not really clicking, you see what happens. Peterson will get like 20 carries for 50 yards or something. Like that sort of line. He's not overly involved in the passing game, so as far as high price running backs go, I find myself looking at him and just passing this week.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Next up, Browns and the Cardinals. And if we see Johnny Manziel starting in this one, then I'm on board with you here. All the Arizona defense. I like to get myself a nice high floor in my catch games with the defense. And, I mean, Johnny Manziel being on the field at all just gives you that floor. And, I mean, as you know, I'm not a believer, but definitely mistake prone. And this is a very opportunistic defense, too.
Yeah, I know. You'll just it'll make you feel alive just to run a defense against Manziel, and it should. I mean, he makes a lot of mistakes. He fumbles a lot. He throws a lot of picks. So, yeah, I mean, Arizona. I mean, you have to pay to get Arizona this week, and honestly, I'm only rolling with them if Manziel plays, because I'm not saying McCown is mistake free, but it's a whole different element when he's playing. So yeah, I really like the zona defense. I think people might be overthinking Carson Palmer here because the Browns are bad against the run. So I think the thinking goes, Browns are bad against the run, so Arizona's going to run for 200 yards, and Palmer's not going to do anything. Palmer does a lot with a little in that offense. He doesn't have to throw 50. In fact, he's probably worse when he throws 40 times in a game than when he throws 25 times, and that includes 3 touchdowns. The Cleveland defense is bad overall. Yep. I think that's one thing that kind of gets lost in the shuffle. So, Palmer is once again a very safe play, and I think that it's just overthinking it to say this is a Chris Johnson game, which we haven't said in like 5 years.
So. Yeah, it's been a very long time since we've said that. So. And it could be. I mean, he's looked good, like you mentioned. Numbers a little bit skewed because he did have that run where everyone thought he was down, wasn't, broke out of the pile. But last one to mention here in this game, talked about Gary Barnidge. Looks like you are on a stay away if Manziel starts. I'm in agreement there. And then if McCown's in, though, we know that these two have a nice rapport. So definitely a guy that is at least GPP worthy if McCown gets a start.
Sure. Yeah, the outlook for Goat Ridge, as I've seen him called on Twitter, changes. According to who's under center for Cleveland. I do want to say that Larry Fitzgerald has probably one of the biggest mismatches as far as wide receiver cornerback goes this week. He's going against Kwan Williams from Cleveland. Fitzgerald is 7 inches taller and 36 pounds heavier than Williams. So. Just a monstrous size advantage that, to me, makes his touchdown potential go up even more than what it usually is, which is pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to like that. And then next game, the Texans and the Titans. The next first game without Arian Foster. This isn't the first time he's had a significant injury, but I'm a Brian Hoyer fan. I'm not ready to give up yet. He was one of about seemingly every single quarterback who was awful in the first half last week. Kind of bailed everyone out late. DeAndre Hopkins was a disappointment last week. Nate Washington kind of stole a lot of his. Obviously, this is the game plan. Take Hopkins out. It worked. But going to be interesting this week to see guys like Hoyer, Nate Washington, what kind of ownership they have. And me personally, I want no part of the Houston running game. There's way better options for me. How about you?
Yeah. I think we talked last week about how if you're playing Brian Hoyer, you're really just playing DeAndre Hopkins. But we also said that Arian Foster's presence in the backfield really changes things for Hoyer, and it keeps defenses honest. It kept defenses honest, and now he doesn't have that. That makes me, I don't know. I'm a Hoyer guy with you, honestly, but it just makes me a little bearish when it comes to saying that you throw him out there as a punt play and cash, because I think that his floor is a little scary now, even against the Titans. One thing I mentioned is that the Titans allow the fewest opposing offensive snaps per game, and the Hoyer and the whole offense has just feeded on volume. They've run, I think, 80 plays per game in this season, or close to it. It's just so the everything coming together. I don't think I'm going to have any Hoyer this week, but Hopkins, might be a nice play because people are scared off from last week after he disappointed.
Yeah, the recency bias definitely going to come into effect there, and I mean we saw him huge ownership the last 2 weeks, especially last week. So you can get a guy who's still averaging, I think it's over 14 targets a game. At that low ownership, I'll certainly have some pieces, but I'm with you on Hoyer. I love the guy. Not sure how many pieces I'll end up having. I got to throw him in at least one tournament, but that'll be about it for me. And then on the Tennessee side, we really don't know if it's going to be Mettenberger, if it's going to be Mariota, and I'm just really not a fan of anyone in this offense this week.
Yeah, this game just strikes me as just a fade, sort of. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just. I liked Mettenberger last week as a GPP throw in at minimum cost, but I think that this offense is just kind of stuck. I don't know. I mean, stuck in the mud, stuck in neutral. It just makes me hesitant to go with anyone. Delaney Walker, I guess, is sort of safe. The Texans, I mean, the Texans are not great against the tight end, but overall, it's just unappealing.
Yeah, and really Walker, I mean, for me, he's a guy I'll throw in because tight end's not a great position this week, it seems, with a lot of matchups, but I think he's an okay cheap play. But yeah, definitely depends a little bit on who's under center there. But we saw 10-7 in Atlanta, Tennessee last week, so I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be a 17-point game in this one, but I mean, I'm not expecting a whole lot out of this, and it doesn't seem like you are either.
No, and that offensive snap thing really is a factor for me here. If I thought that this was going to be a fast-paced back and forth thing, I would be fine with loading up on some guys here. But I just doesn't. The numbers say that it will not be that.
Yeah, and I mean that's significant. I mean it's not middle of the road. I mean that's least in the NFL, so that's definitely going to hamper the upside there. Next up, the Saints and the Giants. Saints small favorites in this one, 26.5 point total. And as you mentioned here, two subpar defensive teams, which might even be kind to say that, especially on the Saints side. There could be a whole lot of fantasy output in this game, obviously with one of the higher totals on the week. And I've struggled with Drew Brees at times because I love, as you know, you love to pair a wide receiver with him. It seems like you never really know who to put in here. But I think Benjamin Watson on that side is a guy who's had a decent amount of volume last week. So if you have to have a punt at tight end, I don't mind him. But I just can't really pinpoint outside of really Mark Ingram who I want from this offense.
Yeah, the Giants' run defense is sort of like low key terrible.
Yeah.
We saw last week. Last week the Cowboys were down by I think 13 at one point, and they were running the ball effectively against the Giants. So teams have done that for a lot of this season, whether they're leading or trailing or it's neutral. It's something that you should look out for, and Ingram is priced pretty high on FanDuel, I have to say, to the point where I don't know, I hedge a little bit on him there. On DraftKings, I think that he's hard to pass up, honestly. His price is pretty low there, but even on FanDuel, I think that he can meet his cost. I just don't think that he can exceed it by very much.
Yeah, and I mean, like we saw last week, I mean, he was very effective, but still didn't get, a ton of looks. I think he had, 14 carries. Did have a couple touchdowns vultured by Kyrie Robinson, so everyone was thrilled about that also. But
yeah.
On the Giants side of this one, though, obviously you've got Eli Manning, who has easily been the better Manning this year. Hasn't been great at times. Obviously, we saw that in the game against the Eagles. Just he was okay, but I mean, I'm just hesitant on Eli Manning because I'm so locked in on some of these other guys, the other quarterbacks this week that I just really haven't given Eli much of a look. But I feel like maybe I should because of this high total. What's your take there?
I no, I agree, and the Saints don't put much pressure on the passer, and that's been Eli's downfall in his bad games this year, is that he's been pressured because his offensive line is not the best. So when he's pressured, that Ben McAdoo offense just doesn't work. But when he has time to sit back there and use those weapons, he's been really effective, and I think that's what we'll see here. In fact, I'm kind of baffled that the spread is 4 and that the Giants are only projected for 22.5. I don't know. I would have guessed that the Giants would be projected for 25-ish here. It just seems like a game where that offense and they really do have a lot of really good pieces that could take full advantage of a New Orleans defense that's kind of a ghost of a defense a lot of weeks. I mentioned here in the article Larry Donnell is I think a sneaky play here. When you adjust for strength of schedule, the Saints allow the second most PPR points to tight ends. I thought that was pretty surprising, and Donald is their only option at tight end. I'm sure that if they had somebody else, he would not be playing because he's not played well. But he's a huge red zone target. He's leading the team in red zone targets, and in a game that I think could be really high scoring. I have him in a lot of cash lineups, actually.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I'm definitely trying to save some money at tight end this week. Unless we look at this next game, which does have 2 tight ends that I'll be considering. Well, one for sure. The second one kind of contingent on Ben Roethlisberger's status. And personally, as a Bengals fan, kind of hope he takes it easy and sits out one more week. But I still think it's kind of gamesmanship what we've seen with Tomlin and him. We see Roethlisberger saying he's not getting his hopes up. Tomlin says, I expect him to play. I mean, everything is pointed ever since the injury. I mean, the day afterward pointed to him returning for this game. Hasn't had any setbacks. You just think that he will. And then it brings in the interesting part of how much Antonio Brown is too much, because he's way underpriced on both sides, if you ask me, especially with Ben probably coming back. And then Le'Veon Bell versus Devontae Freeman. I know firsthand after watching every Bengals-Steelers game since he's been in the league, the Bengals have no answer for him, especially if Vontaze Burfict still isn't back for this game. Le'Veon Bell is feasted against this Bengals defense.
That's a good point. I think Burfict's presence would make a difference here, and you have the added benefit if you're rolling with Bell that recency bias could have people off of him.
Yeah.
This week. I mean, he was really disappointing last week, and the week before, really. But when your offense is being run by Landry Jones and Michael Vick, it's not even a guy like Bell can put up 30 points with those guys at under center. So I have a lot of Bell, and I'm confident. Yeah, you mentioned his success against Cincinnati. That's one thing going for him. With Roethlisberger back under center, hopefully he'll be involved in the passing game, which he was not last week at all. I don't think he saw a target.
It doesn't make any sense. It drives me nuts.
Yeah, I mean, he's the best. I mean, he's one of the best pass-catching backs in the league, so I don't think that they've forgotten that. And I think that this offense will go back to a functioning offense, which includes Bell's floor and ceiling really being boosted.
Yeah, and from the things I'm reading, we did see Burfict return to practice, but I don't think they're going to force him in. He says he can play, but he's not 100%. I just don't imagine Bengals taking a chance on him this week. Yeah. So I'm all aboard the Bell train. The only confliction I have is money or fandom, and I'll take the money all day. Give me some Le'Veon Bell. But on the Bengals side, though, I'm a big fan of Tyler Eifert in this one. How about you? Yeah, I mean, I just think he has huge upside. Steelers really haven't. Their defense isn't allowing a lot of points, actual points. Fantasy points, though, different story. And I mean, I still feel weird saying it, but I am a believer in Andy Dalton with all these weapons healthy, especially. And I mean, he's a guy that I'll have quite a bit of, because I wouldn't be shocked to see this be a 34-31 shootout type of contest.
Right. Yeah, someone on Twitter told me this game will be 16-13 because we think it'll be high scoring, but that would really shock me. It would really surprise me. Eifert is the kind of tight end. Well, that gives everybody problems because he's big and fast. But particularly the Steelers have had trouble guarding that kind of tight end. They've allowed 44 receptions to opposing tight ends this season, which is the second most, just behind the Raiders, of course, who are consistently burned by tight ends. So, yeah, Eifert, I think is reasonably priced across the DFS spectrum. So yeah, I love his prospects here. I think that he has a really high floor here. I just don't think that there's any way that he's going to be taken out of the offensive game plan with as many weapons as Dalton has, like you said, at his exposure.
Yeah, definitely like that. Next one, gonna be ugly outside of really two guys, and one of them's a defensive unit. As far as I'm concerned, Todd Gurley. In case you didn't know, if you didn't play him last week, that's your own fault because I saw he was 67% owned, and the Millionaire Maker on DraftKings, lesser owned on FanDuel because he wasn't a ridiculous discount. He's still way too cheap on DraftKings at $6,300 this week. I don't mind him. I think he's 81 on FanDuel. I think he's still a fine play there. And Rams defense, like you mentioned here, they're kind of, I don't know if they necessarily are the chalk this week, but they probably should be because we've seen the Niners be turnover prone, and I'm just not a believer that this offense is suddenly capable. I'm not.
No, we heard a lot of rumors after they lost to Seattle. I think they gained 120 yards total, 130 yards total, that there was some big change afoot in San Francisco. Nothing developed, but that team is a disaster. They look good against the Giants. There was another game where Ravens against the Ravens.
But who wouldn't look good against that secondary?
Yeah. But I threw for $150 and a touchdown against the Ravens. But yeah, I know. First of all, have you ever seen a team projected for under 16 points?
I feel like the one time we did see it this year was the Bears against Seattle with Jimmy Clausen. I think they were 15, if I remember right around there. But
yeah,
other than that, I don't know that it's happened in recent memory at all.
It's and yeah, when we're looking at defenses, we're looking at turnover potential more than point scoring. More than how much the opponent will score. But I think we have both things going for us here. In losses, Colin Kaepernick averages 1.1 interceptions per game compared to 0.2 when the Niners win. So it would be pretty surprising if he doesn't turn the ball over at least once or twice here. The Rams are getting really good pressure, consistent pressure on the quarterback. So I have the Rams, I have Gurley, just no one else. The rest of the St. Louis offense is unusable.
Horrible.
Nick Foles is not even, you can't even call him a caretaker quarterback. He's just like a human who happens to be handing the ball off to Gurley at this point.
Yeah, he drops back to pass and you say, please don't throw an interception so that Gurley doesn't get his yardage. Don't ruin this possession for me.
Yeah, right. It's depressing. I have Brian Quick in a couple dynasty leagues, and Quick is now just an observer to the Gurley show for however long. I don't even want to think about how long this could be for him.
Yeah, Brian Quick needs to get talking with his agent, get himself out of town where he can actually be used, because that's a weapon that's going to be completely wasted by having Nick Foles under center. Next one, Raiders and the Jets, 44-point total, close game here, and we saw this Oakland team last week look incredible, offense and defense really, as far as at least the first three quarters went. Fourth quarter, you kind of give them a pass there. The game was well out of hand, but they looked great. Jets also looked good last week. They competed with the Patriots. I won't say they nearly won, but they were in it until the end. So this one I'm kind of torn on because you got Chris Ivory, who they said was questionable. Looks like he's going to play. I like a lot of these Jets players, but it's still, I'm a little bit hesitant to send out too many of these guys here because I do think there's teams in better spots, but I still also want a piece of this game though.
Yeah, we talked. This being the day before Halloween, I think that it's appropriate to point out that, as I put in the article, the zombie of Peyton Manning is the only quarterback to really struggle against Oakland.
Yep.
So I'm confident in Fitzpatrick here, in Ryan Fitzpatrick. He's shown that maybe he's not as bad as I thought he was going to be in losses. With negative game script, He did well last week, being down the entire game. And I think that has a lot to do with weapons. Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker, that's a legit combo, and I think we see that week in and week out. Price wise, I just lean toward Decker here. He has the better cornerback matchup, and B, he's seeing pretty good volume. So if you want to stack somebody with Fitzpatrick, I would go Decker. But Marshall's not a terrible option either.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you there. And then looking on the other side here, give me your take on this because I still am somewhat a believer that we see some Revis with Amari Cooper here, and that it's a tough matchup for him. So I've gone back and forth on throwing Michael Crabtree in as a cheap filler in my cash games there because I feel like he's similarly priced to Nate Washington, who I think people will use as a cheap play this weekend, and I get that. But I'm a fan of Crabtree this week, but it scares me a little bit.
Yeah, it all depends on Revis, and I know Amari Cooper's very good. Don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but so is Revis, and I think that it might be a little bit foolish to say I don't care who's covering Cooper. Last week Cooper had a bad matchup coming into the game against Jason Verrett, but he ended up doing pretty well.
Manhandling.
But yeah, I think Crabtree. I think Crabtree is a candidate for 10 targets here, and in a game that I think could kind of be sneaky high scoring. So I'm with you. I'm with you on Crabtree. I don't really feel the need to throw him into cash games, but I think that his ceiling is good enough to be a tournament guy.
Yeah, definitely. Next up, the Cowboys and the Seahawks. And this is one, your first line there is in full line with my thinking here, where, if we don't get Johnny Manziel against the Cardinals, I mean, Seattle's the defense that I'm paying up for, and it seems like you agree with that as well. I mean, it doesn't matter to me that Darren McFadden had his breakout game, whatever it may be. Des Bryant probably coming back for this game, maybe coming back, I guess nothing definitive, but I mean, this Seattle defense just looks so good, and the Cowboys offense, like, you don't have Tony Romo to throw the ball to Des Bryant. So Des Bryant, he's not a quarterback. So I just still don't see Dallas doing much of anything in this game.
The only thing that makes me hesitant at all about Seattle's defense is that they're not at home.
Yeah.
But we learned last week that when Matt Castle has to drop back and throw it downfield, and he will do that, he'll have some great plays and he'll have some disastrous plays. Across the board. He had a couple unbelievable throws, right? Last week against the Giants. He also had back-breaking throws. So, against the Seahawks secondary, which I know Seahawks secondary has crumbled in the fourth quarter several times this year, but overall they've been solid. And I think that I think the Castle will have to throw a lot in a game that projects as one where Dallas will be trailing, and so I love Seattle. In fact, I tend to lean Seattle over Arizona right now, with the questions about who's starting for the Browns. And then getting to McFadden for a minute, McFadden intrigued me when he took up that Lance Dunbar role after Dunbar went down for the year, just because Dunbar was fantastic from a PPR perspective. So McFadden, with that role, he could rush for like 20 yards in this game, which I think is kind of conceivable, and still score 12, 15 PPR points without a touchdown. So and he's so cheap. So I'm not. In fact, some lineups where I have Seattle's defense and McFadden.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And then you mentioned also Marshawn Lynch here a little bit. We saw finally a big workload for him. So, if this one is kind of like what Vegas expects it to be, this could definitely be a Lynch, a 20-touch Lynch game where he goes and has himself a nice night too.
Yeah, I think the numbers are a little bit skewed on Dallas's run defense because of that hilariously horrible game against the Eagles in Week 2. The Patriots eclipsed 100 yards on rushing on 19 carries against Dallas, and the Giants did it with 20 carries. So, Lynch with 20 carries here, I think, is a really good candidate for 100 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah, I like that. And then this next one, you mentioned, last year even, this would have been a game we won a ton of pieces of, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, I love the Packers defense in tournaments. Peyton Manning has just looked awful.
Right.
They have no running game to speak of. You mentioned here also Demaryius Thomas matchup against Sam Shields is an awful one. I tend to think Emmanuel Sanders will still get his. He always kind of does. But Peyton Manning's made so many mistakes recently. I just feel like the Packers are that maybe they're not that sneaky. I'm a big fan because Peyton has looked so horrible.
Yeah, it's a big adjustment in thinking, right?
Yeah, huge.
You would never have targeted the Denver offense with the defense in 2013 or 14. In fact, I think that they allowed negative fantasy points to opposing defenses last year overall. So you would never do that. But we're looking for inaccurate quarterbacks, and Peyton is bottom five in accuracy when you account for throwaways and spikes. Just when you talk about aim throws, he bottom five. So along with like Jameis Winston and Blake Bortles. Yeah, and the Packers are pretty opportunistic as far as turnovers go. I actually think that they're a pretty nice cash game play as well. I think this game could be sort of depressingly low scoring.
Yeah, yeah, and like you mentioned a little bit earlier about cash game quarterbacks, Rodgers has been good enough to win games, but I mean he hasn't been putting up monster stat lines. So if we're talking a game that could be high scoring based on Vegas total, that might be a 16-13 game. I think this is that game where we see the Packers 20-ish points, maybe 20 to 13. I just don't see a whole lot of this one. I probably won't have any pieces outside of maybe that Green Bay defense.
Yeah, the Broncos defense. I think it's pretty good play. I mean, they're at home. They're crushing as far. Their secondary is tops in everything.
Yeah.
Completion percentage allowed, yards per attempt, yards per completion. Just laughably low numbers across the board that they're allowing. It makes me a little bit. It makes me think a little bit that throwing in some Green Bay passing game pieces would be a decent idea in GPPs because they'll be so low owned. I think I saw Randall Cobb on FanDuel has a 2% ownership percentage in Thursday games.
Yeah, and a lot of recency bias with that too. I mean, he hasn't been great over the past couple weeks. Did have that 3 touchdown game. I think it was week 2 or week 3. But so you mean we know he still has upside. It's not that he's not the player. I mean, he's not Eddie Lacy. He's not just not a good player anymore like Eddie Lacy has seemed to be. So, and you mentioned Eddie Lacy there. Supposedly he's the starter again. James Stark's banged up too, and no thanks. I can't do it with Eddie Lacy.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the Chiefs are the only team to really have a lot of success against Denver on the ground. That was Jamal Charles. Lacy, the ankle. The game script here, it doesn't scream Lacy to me. He has a scary floor, let's put it that way.
Yeah, and he just has not looked good. It's not even just tough matchups to me. I mean, every time I watch him, he just doesn't. I mean, he doesn't make good decisions. Not finding the holes. I can't. I got to see him do something first. Someone can beat me with Eddie Lacy, and then I'll learn my lesson. But
there you go.
I'm not going to beat myself with him. Carolina Panthers and the Indianapolis Colts, the Monday night game, the final game of the slate here. Panthers have a nice big team total, and another situation here of how the mighty have kind of fallen. Colts, really potent offense at times last year. If you could just play the Colts second half only, we get some DFS contests second half only. I'll play all the Colts every day, but unfortunately, you can't do that. And I mean, I'm torn on this one too because T.Y. Hilton, like you mentioned here, had a huge game last week. But he's going to see Josh Norman. Really, even last week, I think it was 15 targets and he caught 4 of them. Andrew Luck has just been brutal. And I'm seeing people talking about Moncrief in cash games. I'm just not convinced that I could play any Colts in cash games anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're banking on garbage time if you're putting in someone like Moncrief. I think that the Colts are going to have to throw a lot in this game, so it makes me think that Coby Fleener might be a decent kind of punt play at tight end because the ball's going to have to go somewhere, right? And if those cornerbacks have the receivers shut down, especially Norman who will mostly be on TY, I just think that Fleener might see some decent volume. But besides that, I'm just not wild about the Colts options. I think it is worth mentioning that the Colts and Panthers are allowing the first and second most offensive snaps to opponents through 7 weeks. They're both averaging just around 70 to opponents. It's just a lot, as you know. So I think that it might not be horrible to get some Colts into your lineup, just considering that. But the Panthers total 26.75. I think the Cam Newton is primed for a really high floor game here.
Yeah.
I know that last week. I mean, last week was pretty disappointing, honestly, for him. I think he scored, 16, 17 fantasy points
Yeah, with those 3 picks.
in a game that felt like he scored 25. And but this is a good matchup, and obviously being the prime goal line guy for the Panthers just boosts his floor every week.
Yeah, and one guy I like more so on DK is Jonathan Stewart getting a lot of touches, and he's only 4,100 on DK this week. So if you just need a cash game field, I don't think he has a ton of upside. Probably not a GPP guy for me, but he's a guy I don't mind slotting into my cash games in that final spot if I just love the rest of my lineup. I think he's going to get 15 plus touches. So
He's been much better. I understand that they changed the running scheme a little bit to fit his style, to fit his strengths, and since then he's had two pretty decent games.
yeah, absolutely. All right, well, thanks for hanging out with us here once again. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. Got lots of other great content. Check out Denny's full write-up. We covered most of it, but obviously check that out on dailyfantasycafe.com.